Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about why the Imperial Guard is probably the best human soldier faction in all of science fantasy, even sci-fi. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions, please comment down below. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the regiments of the Imperial Guard. One of the biggest criticisms of Warhammer 40K is the faction known as the Imperial Guard. The common argument asks, why would anyone want to play a simple human soldier when you can play a superhuman enhanced angel of death, or a cunningly brutal green-skinned alien, or even better yet, an undying self-regenerating robot that is over 60 million years old. And while all those factions have amazing lore, they don't compare to the insanely customizable lore of the Imperial Guard. To prove that the Astra Militarum is superior to any other military faction, both in and out of Warhammer 40k, we will be looking at how diverse the regiments of the Imperial Guard could be, starting with the Fantine Air Corps. The Fantine Air Corps is an unusual, regiment-sized force of Imperial fighter bombers and bombers that provide dedicated air support for the ground forces of the Astra Militarum. The Fantine Air Corps is unique compared to all other regiments in that it is composed of all air and no ground forces, a specialty by virtue of their home planet of Fantine. Compared to many of the early colonized worlds of the Segmentum Solar, Fantine is a fairly young world, famously led by Saint Fidolus. The first Imperial colonists liberated Fantine and discovered tremendously rich deposits of promethium, which led them to quickly industrialize the world. Fantine's industries soon specialized in producing petrochemicals, exporting their products to many worlds. It was not long before the first hive cities began to rise from the ground. Unfortunately, after 15 standard centuries of continuous and ruthless exploitation, Fantine's refineries and other industries had rendered the world's troposphere uninhabitable. A 5,000-meter thick blanket of aerial pollution and noxious gases covered Fantine's entire surface. A dangerous and toxic sea of clouds named the Scald. To survive, Fantine's population had to resettle above the cloud line, seeking refuge on the highest mountain chains or the spire tips of the greatest hive cities. There, the Fantines erected new cities, little islands in a sea of toxic fog. This development led to the profound change in Fantine society, which through necessity came to rely almost entirely on aviation for trade and transportation. Formerly dedicated to the production of petrochemicals, Fantine's manufacturers now turned to energy production, erecting great steam mills and center power plants that formed the beating heart of the new airborne society. By necessity, to protect them from the corrosive atmosphere, Fantine cities are sealed off from their environment, thus warranting cycles of artificial rain within their confines. Many large cities also feature great panels of armored glass. Due to the lack of landmass, Fantine has to import most of its food and materials from the wider Imperium. These are usually transported from city to city in great gas-filled aerostats, many kilometer-long flying behemoths that observers compare to the ancient zeppelins of old Earth. Many of these aerostats have also been converted for military use and act as flying air bases for Fantine's planetary defense force. While difficult to assail due to their planet's topography, Fantine cities are by no means fortresses designed to withstand sustained assault. Typically, Fantine cities consist of several interlinked habdomes where the population lives, and a center steam-based power plant for energy production. Landing fields, secondary steam centrals, waste incinerators, or refineries are often located on the city's exterior, connected to the main habdomes by great conduits or causeways that are located above the cloud line. The habdomes themselves also feature great terraces used by the inhabitants to move from place to place within the city. The domes are studded with anti-air defense guns, as well as gangways, in order to inspect the dome's physical integrity after one of the many acid storms that periodically assaults the settlement of Fantine. The strange mixture of airborne chemicals frequently causes electromagnetic storms in the depths of the Scald, whose layers are also prone to spontaneous combustion. Such an event lends the Scald an eerie and strange glow that has often been interpreted as a bad omen by the people of Fantine. The upper layers of the Scald frequently erupt into violent storms that can wash away the more precarious cities and force the aerostats to take unexpected detours from their standard routes. In the past, Fantine was once a verdant world, harboring hundreds of thousands of different species. but the toxic vapors of the scald have either killed or profoundly affected Fantine's biodiversity. Worst affected was Fantine's flora, which proved unable to evolve quickly enough to escape the suffocating and toxic vapors of pollution. Nowadays, the only traces of vegetation on Fantine can be found within the hermetically sealed cities, and more specifically the upper-class levels of the primary habitation domes, where Fantine's elite live. On those levels, the wealthiest men and women have preserved some parts of their world's native trees amongst well-kept gardens, which were sometimes decorated by artificial lakes. However, outside of the habdomes, Fantine's wildlife has been profoundly affected by the world's industrial poisoning. At ground level, nothing survived, and only airborne specimens were able to follow Fantine's population into safety. Over the following standard millennia, a rudimentary ecosystem established itself around the great Fantine dome cities. At the lowest level of this ecosystem are located the thermovores, small slug-like creatures that colonize the outer walls of Fantine's dome cities, especially around the impressive vents of the thermal power plants. Thermovores feed on the vapors given off by the thermal plants and the small metallic particles dissolved by the world's continuous acid rainstorms. Thermovores secrete a thick, acid-resistant slime that protects them from the more dangerous features of Fantine's climate. Several smaller predators roam the city's exteriors, all of which are winged and feed on each other or the humble thermovores. But the mightiest beast of Fantine's skies lives within the toxic miasma of the scald, the sky shark. This almost legendary beast is universally recognized as the alpha predator on Fantine, but very little information is available on it. Its exact wingspan and shape are unknown, and the Fantine avoid it at all cost. As for the inhabitants of Fantine, the society widely conforms to the imperial culture of other civilized worlds that share the same level of population and technology. In stark contrast to the society on most hive worlds, there is no lower caste or underhive scum, as every member of society is deemed valuable to the continued survival of the world's dome cities. Fantine is not ruled by a single imperial governor, as is customary, but by an assembly of elected officials who comprise the World Senate. Its office holders go by the title of senator, and invariably live a life of luxury in large estates on the upper levels of the habdomes, their great palaces or villas surrounded by well-tended gardens and orchards. These estates often mark the sole trace of greenery in the Fantine city. Other influential personalities, such as the high-ranking officers of the Planetary Defense Force and members of the imperial clergy, share the same level of accommodation and together form the Fantine's ruling elite. Just below this group are the high-ranking adepts of the other imperial adepta, such as the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Arbitus. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains a discreet presence on Fantine. The few tech priests required to maintain Fantine's power plants and refineries also never leave the compounds they have been assigned to. Crime, often uncontrollable on more populous imperial worlds, is notoriously low on Fantine. The layout of its cities and the lack of land-based access routes considerably facilitate the Adeptus Arbitus task of maintaining order, so that the Fantine has not had to rely on the auxiliary corps of enforcers. Amongst common people, pilots are held in the highest regard, be they simple soldiers of the Planetary Defense Force or a member of a highly respected Fantine Air Corps. Second in regard are the Planetary Defense Force's airborne soldiers, who serve aboard the great military aerostats that act as mobile bases. Finally, the steam mill and power plant workers, on which the great cities rely, are held as an elite group because without their labor, the dome cities would cease to exist. A Fantine citizen's social rank can be determined from the location of their home, as the most humble are forced to live on the exterior rim of the habdomes. Several great Fantine cities, such as Urumburg, have several smaller habdomes exclusively dedicated to residences for the steam mill and power plant workers, while to prevent accidents, the city's refineries and other chemical plants are often located on separate platforms located outside the protected habdomes. Given to Fantine's unique nature, the order of battle common to most regiments of the Astra Militarum do not apply to the Fantine Air Corps. Instead, the Air Corps closely follows the organization of the Imperial Navy, the military branch of the Imperium of Man, with most experience in regards to aircraft and their deployment. The Fantine Air Corps is a mixed regiment where female pilots and even officers are commonplace and benefit from the same level of respect as their male colleagues, something which is relatively rare in the conservative and often hidebound hierarchy of the Imperial Navy. The main tactical unit within the Fantine Air Corps is the Wing, roughly equivalent to the Imperial Navy Squadron. Each wing benefits from its own support detachment of ground crew and technicians, which makes the Fantine Air Corps a highly flexible formation, a flexibility it often desperately needs in battle. Depending on its specialization, bombardment, reconnaissance, or interception, a wing is comprised of 8 to 12 aircraft, in addition to the squadron's leader's own craft. Each wing is led by a commissioned officer, who usually carries the rank of wing commander, often shortened simply to commander. It is customary for the wing commander to select a second-in-command, known as an executive officer, within the Fantine Air Corps, from the pilots serving under him or her. Each wing can be further broken down into lesser formations, known as flights, for missions that do not need the full strength of the entire wing, such as routine patrols. When in combat, a commander's will is law over his wing, while strategic deployment of the entire Air Corps is determined by the officers who comprise the Fantine High Command. The Fantine High Command is autonomous from both the hierarchy of the Imperial Navy, which has no authority over any Imperial Guard unit, and from the other larger Astra Militaris, which lacks the expertise and tactical knowledge to deploy aircraft wisely. This unusual command autonomy has led to considerable tensions within both the Navy and the Guard, and as a result, the personnel of the Fantine Air Corps often keep to themselves. The Enothian War holds a special place in the history of the Fantine Air Corps, as it was one of the unit's first great victories, as well as the first time an officer from Fantine was put in command of an entire Imperial war zone. Much like Fantine itself, the civilized world of Enothis had come under attack by the forces of chaos, led by one of the most notorious generals, Magister and Kawarna Sect. The Chaos Cultists gained control of the southern Trinity Hive cities and pushed to the north, where they were met by the Enothian Planetary Defense Force. Bolstered by elements of the Sabbath World Crusade, the Imperium pushed back, but after more than 200 solar days of fighting, the Imperial forces suffered a grievous defeat at the gates of the Trinity Hive. Unknown to the Imperium, the archenemy had received powerful reinforcements, including several regiments of blood-packed troopers and Sek's own cadre of elite fighter pilots, while the assembled might of several armored and mechanized regiments of the Imperial Guard and a sizable portion of Enothis' own planetary defense forces fought a desperate retreat through the interior desert. Harassed constantly by enemy ground and air forces, the war shifted from land to sky. By direct order of War Master Makaroth, Grand Admiral Ornoff of the Fantine Air Corps was put in charge of the Enothis war zone. Several wings of the Fantine Air Corps were immediately deployed to Enothis on the war's 250th day. In a great redeployment, the Imperial Navy and the Fantine Air Corps replaced the outgunned and outclassed air force of the Enothian Commonwealth, which were being slowly whittled down by the enemy Hellblade, Helltalon fighters, and the fighter bombers. In a protracted and bitter delaying action against the forces of the archenemy, the Imperial aircraft covered the retreat of the Imperial ground forces to the planetary capital city. Having constructed mobile ground-based land carriers for its aircraft, the archenemy's counteroffensive almost caught up with the Imperial retreat before the troops were successfully evacuated amphibiously from the southern shores of the sea. After the retreat, the Imperium's air assets relocated to a series of well-defended air bases located on several islands to the sea. What was later called the Battle of the Sophonian Sea, the archenemy launched all of its remaining aircraft against the hopelessly outnumbered Imperial formations. Yet, through remarkable determination and bloody sacrifice, the Imperial line held. By the 270th day of the conflict, the enemy's will had been broken thanks to the heroic efforts of all the Imperial squadrons, especially the Fantine 20. With new reinforcements allotted to Enothis by the Crusade High Command, the archenemy's offensive on Enothis was successfully repelled and finally defeated at the Second Battle of the Trinity Hives. Unfortunately, despite the final Imperial victory, Magister Sect managed to evade capture and flee the planet. Now let's take a look at the Savlar Chem Dogs. The Savlar Chem Dogs are an Imperial Guard regiment made up of troops that have committed capital crimes and have been sentenced to life service in the Astra Militarum. As the name suggests, these criminal soldiers come from the planet of Savlar. The Savlar system is located 100 light-years from Armageddon in the Segmentum Solar. It is a desolate place. Small chemical deposits found on the volcanic moons of Savlar penitents drew the attention of the Imperium, and an attempt to turn these moons into mining worlds was executed early on. Unfortunately, the resource venture proved fruitless as the mining facilities struggled to meet mining quotas. Lack of manpower and highly toxic working conditions made it almost impossible for the world to turn out a profit for the Imperium. Not ready to give up on the potential resource the planet could provide, the Adept Estera regraded Savlar as a penal world in the 39th millennium, shipping in criminals who had been captured during the recent Bakura rebellion by the thousands, along with special detachments of the Adeptus Arbitus to ensure productivity. Within 3 standard decades, the chemical production of Savlar was supplying 3 civilized worlds and 2 forge worlds in the surrounding subsector. The population of the moons was subsequently swelled by a regular influx of thieves, murderers, and traitors from all across the Armageddon sector. But as the success of mining increased, so too did the high mortality rate. The poisonous mines of Savlar and its moons became notorious among criminal fraternities, leading it to be known as the Dead Dog Moons, and the phrase "dead as Savlar" became widespread in the sector. Eventually, the penal world became too unruly, and all the criminals, thieves, and murderers revolted against their jailers. It was Judge Callistar, an Adeptus Arbitus senior judge and magistrate, that called the rebellion by forming a penal legion with a few remaining Adeptus Arbitus and loyal prisoners. The pacification of the rebellion demonstrated the potential power the world had to muster a controllable fighting force. When the world failed to meet its mining tides, and simultaneously the Third War of Armageddon threatened the Imperium, the clever judge saw the opportunity to showcase the value of his fighting force. The criminals of Savlar were officially conscripted into the Imperial Guard, and the Savlar Chemdog Regiment was born. The Penal Legion was promised that they could keep whatever they took from the enemy. This promise was made to ensure the criminal soldiers would follow orders, and for good measure, they were threatened to be sent back to the toxic nightmare of the Legion's homeworld, should any of them attempt to break the law again. Regiments of the Savlar Chemdogs were first used beneath the hive cities of Armageddon, to repel any orcs trying to invade the cramped, toxic regions of the Underhives. The leader of the ruling military council of Armageddon, General Kurov, saw the Chemdogs as a perfect fit for taking the fight deep into the toxic bowels of the rotting Underhives. They were given the orders to go as deep into the access tunnels and crawlways as they could. Any orc forces attempting to infiltrate into a hive from the Marad tunnels below not only had to fight the crazed mutants and monstrous denizens of the Underhive, but some of the most hardened criminals and desperados in the Imperium. Not only did this suit the Chemdogs admirably, as they were adapted to the horrible toxic conditions, but they were also able to plunder many old and valuable pieces of archaeotech. Needless to say, the Chemdogs took every opportunity they could to steal anything that was not nailed down. Not trusted with some of the more ancient weapons used by the Imperial Guard regiments, the Chemdogs were mostly armed with flamers and heavy bolters. To survive in the harsh environments of the Underhive, the legions were fitted with the Savlar rebreather units, which originally were built to filter out the toxins and poisons of the Savlar atmosphere, but the breathing apparatus was much too bulky and had 4 intake/outtake hoses connected to a large canister and filter mask. The resourceful criminal soldiers were able to secure a large number of the superior Armageddon pattern filter masks that would later be reported lost or stolen in every war zone frequented by the Chemdogs. Oftentimes, the Chemdogs would modify their rebreather units to include nitrochem inhalers for the intake of dangerous hyper-aggressive stimulant chemicals. These drugs gave the Penal Legion the courage needed to face not only the greenskin menace of Armageddon, but all of the mutants that called the Underhive home. Guardsmen of these regiments are also prone to carrying a number of non-standard pieces of gear, such as stolen improved body armor, civilian-made dust goggles, and vox casters, and even extremely rare archaeotech they have acquired. The Chemdogs were always accompanied by a high number of commissars, since they are a Penal Legion regiment that needs constant motivation to do their job properly. Savlar Chemdog regiments had access to Ogrins and a special type of Astra Militarum Rough Rider, known as the Savlar Chem Rider, whose riding animals were altered with chemicals to survive in toxic environments of the Underhives. The invaluable performance of the Savlar Chemdogs on Armageddon pushed the Astra Militarum to utilize these regiments in countless campaigns throughout the Imperium. The Chemdogs became highly resourceful and surprisingly enterprising. Rather than waiting for battlefield resupply, they often repurposed old equipment. They became known to strip weapons from vehicles and proceed on foot when fuel was low, or replace broken machine parts with similarly shaped pieces of scrap. And though effective, such practices have been seen more than a few Savlar officers executed for heresy by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Some rare regiments are even given Imperial vehicles such as Hellhounds, Leman Russ tanks, as well as Sentinels. Chemdog artillery assets utilize Basilisks and Griffins. Currently, the Savlar Chemdogs are most often used in campaigns against demons that now haunt the Ash Wastes and Underhives in the wake of the Great Rift's birth. But just like on Armageddon, the Chemdogs are not trusted by other Imperial Guard regiments, and sadly, they have good reason to not trust a band of criminal soldiers. Now let's take a look at the Scintillan Fusiliers. The Scintillan Fusiliers are a highly unusual Imperial Guard regiment composed of the sons and daughters of the noble families of the hive world of Scintilla, the capital world of the Calixis sector. While most regiments of the Astra Militarum recruit from the lower classes of hive worlds, or draft from all but the upper echelons of Imperial society, the Scintillan Fusiliers are the best and brightest that the planet has to offer. These noble men and women rarely enlist out of some sense of duty to the Imperium, the God Emperor, or even their homeworld. Instead, most have self-serving aspirations behind their choice to take up the life of a soldier. For some, it is a form of rebellion, a way to get back at their overbearing parents for the numerous offenses heaped upon their children. For others, it is simply out of amusement, a way to pass the time and avoid the dullness of the Scintillan Salon society. In their eyes, it is a chance to have adrenaline-pumping adventures that might put them at fatal risk. Some are also second or third sons and daughters, children with little to inherit in the twisted web of the Scintillan noble society. They would much rather risk their lives than live in the shadows of their older siblings. These individuals often aspire to make a name for themselves within the ranks of the Astra Militarum, away from their family name. They see the regiment as a way to further their political or social goals and to gain wealth and glory on their own. Their hope is an eventual high-paid and respected administration position as a general officer with a noble title, a staff, and a generous salary from the Departamental Minitorum. Whatever their reasons, there are precious few among the Scintillan Fusiliers who see their duty as anything but a means to an end. The regiments are rarely deployed far from Scintilla, and when they are, it is in the softest and most luxurious lodges available in theater. So pampered are these soldiers that a large portion are accompanied by a servant or other lackey to assist in the day-to-day tasks, and this also includes simple infantrymen. Officers of the Scintillan Fusiliers tend to have many servants and aides, and the regiment always travels with all of the amenities of home that can be provided by the Departamental Minitorum and their own personal purses. Because of all of this luxury, the Scintillan Fusiliers are often considered posers by other guardsmen. To the Fusiliers, the knowledge that their counterparts in other regiments see them as simply playing soldier means little to them. In their eyes, other guardsmen are socially inferior. This regiment tends to field few of the common Astra Militarum units. They consider siege work to be beneath them, suitable only for the criminals and peasants who are used to living in the dirt. And there is no glory, as far as their leaders are concerned, in light infantry and reconnaissance work. Though various regiments over the centuries have been forced by circumstance to fight in protracted sieges, close urban combats, and other such low tasks better left to servitors or even feral worlders, most of the regiments have avoided such unpleasant assignments, thanks in no small part to their close political connection to the capital city. But despite their pedigree and overflowing armories, the regiment's training extends only to what is laid down in the Imperial Infantry's uplifting primer, a standard military text laying out the most basic martial doctrines. Their training consists mostly of deep underhive hunts targeting the creatures in the depths of Scintilla's forgotten pits, and their experience has largely been in low-intensity conflicts, where the regiment could bathe themselves in the greatest amount of glory for the least amount of risk. The amount of medals garnered by these regiments, while certainly impressive, is not equivalent with the amount of actual combat the regiment has seen. This has led many in the Spinward front to look skeptically at any so-called achievement made by the Fusiliers. Nevertheless, the Fusiliers continue to gain notoriety. The Scintillan 17th, called the Spireborns for obvious reasons, are a particularly famous regiment, largely for being the chosen unit of of the powerful Commander General, Payless, of the Scintillan 4th Army Group. Favored by the Commander General, thanks to their shared heritage as scions of powerful Scintillan noble houses, and the political and business ties the Commander General maintains amongst the Scintillan nobility, the 17th Regiment is known throughout the Imperial Guard regiments operating in the Calixis sector as the Golden Regiment. The 17th's commander, an unimaginative colonel by the name of Eli Hamsha, is a strict literalist when it comes to military orthodoxy. He adheres to the letter of both his orders and well-worn Imperial tactic doctrines, showing little initiative and a distinct inability to interpret the nuance of the battlefield. Luckily, certain individual formations within the regiment are run by competent leaders. The head of several armored companies in the 17th Regiment have largely disregarded the colonel's ideas that the intimidation factor of an armored column and the inherent grit of the Imperial armor crews, rather than intensive training in gunnery and armored assault tactics, are all that is needed to defeat the enemies of the Imperium. In fact, the leader of the company, a major by the name of Eldon de Mol, is a staunch believer in a scientific approach to battle, and trains his tank crews thoroughly in gunnery, piloting, movement, and efficient armor tactics. He has even been accused of being an innovator, a charge bordering on heresy to some of the more orthodox Imperial Guard commanders, but his results speak for themselves, and the accolades won by the 17th Regiment's armored companies are both hard-won and well-deserved. De Mol's armored companies are equipped with a common pattern of Leman Russ tanks, but they do count amongst their ranks a small number of Leman Russ Executioners and Leman Russ Vanquishers. They even possess 2 Baneblade Super Heavy tanks, but these precious relics rarely leave the 17th Regiment's home base on Scintilla. The Fusiliers' wealth and prestige also extends to their standard issue war gear, which is by no means standard for a normal guardsman. The whole regiment wears an ornamented light carapace armor, which is generally a sign of status and is mostly worn by Imperial officers, special forces, and agents of the Inquisition. Made from molded plates of armoplast, ceramide, or other light but highly resistant material, it covers selected regions or the entire body, depending on the desired level of protection. Its lightweight is meant for units that require speed over protection, but it is chosen by the Fusiliers because of how comfortable it is compared to normal armor. On top of this light protection, the Scintillan Fusiliers are decorated in elaborate regimental dress. A Tricorn hat replaces the standard issue helmet. This hat is often made from a very expensive animal hair felt, and each hat incorporates a gold or silver lace trimming with feathers. A cockade, a knot of ribbons, or other emblems decorate the front. The style serves 3 purposes. First, it shows status, as this is an ancient Terran design. Secondly, it allows the guardsmen to show off the most current fashion of their wigs. And third, the cocked hat with a folded brim is much smaller than other hats, and therefore could be easily tucked under an arm when going inside a building, where Scintillan social etiquette dictates that a gentleman remove his hat. Its side laces could also be loosened, and the sides drop down to provide better protection from the weather, sun, and rain. All Fusiliers wore a white dress shirt under a navy blue waistcoat, all tucked in to their blue and white breeches. Stylized blue gaiters are worn over their military boots. Their armor is then worn under a long coat laced with gold trim. Their neck is covered with a fancy gorget, and draped over their shoulders and chest is an ornate shoulder sash, locked into place by stylized epaulets. Their regimental dress uniform is proof enough that the Fusiliers rarely see combat, and when they do, they are as far from the front lines as possible, which is why the story of the Scintillan Fusiliers 112th Regiment, known as the Mortis Wardens, is one of the funniest in Imperial Guard history. After suffering heavy casualties, the Administratum Command ordered the 112th to merge with the embittered and understaffed 456th Katajan Jungle Fighters, the Rack Swaps. The 2 regiments were polar opposites and had a very difficult time fighting together, but they did manage to have an incredibly low number of friendly fire incidences, the lowest in the sector's history. Now let's take a look at the Semtexian Bombardiers. The Semtexian Bombardiers are a relatively new Imperial Guard regiment native to the mining world of Semtexia, a regiment that has seen major actions on the hive world of Armageddon. Since it was colonized, the mining planet of Semtexia was always considered a modest mining world, providing meager tithes to the Imperium of some of the most basic resources. This all changed when a unique substance called cultrinium was discovered by the miners. What made this material so important was its usefulness in the manufacturing of military-grade weapons. The resource was quickly exploited, and large exports began to go out to the nearby hive world of Armageddon. With such a valuable resource, it wasn't long before the once humble world required a strong military presence, and so Semtexia started producing military units from their miner population. A small but reputable planetary defense force was mustered. And then on the day of the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, Augur psychic probes registered a massive disruption in the warp as an orc fleet emerged into the sector. Gatskull's greenskin horde descended on Semtexia's trading partner, Armageddon. As a direct response to this massive orc invasion, the first full regiments of Semtexian bombardiers was raised to aid their desperate allies in what became known as the Second War for Armageddon. With many fighting men from Armageddon's neighboring worlds already committed to either the defense of Armageddon from the first orcish assault, or in preparing their own star systems for possible attack, it was left to the Semtexians with their limited resources to provide an army of reinforcements. Artillery pieces were hastily manufactured from all the raw materials that could be scraped together in time from the planet's surface, with many mining and civilian vehicles cannibalized to provide the necessary components. However, the first Semtexians were woefully short of both men and equipment as they boarded converted merchant transports for their journey to Armageddon. Their numbers barely 4 full batteries. As the orc horde spread rapidly across the subcontinent of Armageddon Secundus, many factories fell to their advance, including those responsible for manufacturing of artillery, thus depriving the Imperial forces of an important resource that was so desperately needed in battle. Once on Armageddon, the Semtexian bombardiers were immediately deployed to the front lines, where the Imperial defenders had been pushed back as far as the Archon Hive by the Greenskin Tide. Their determined actions in repelling the orcs from the city with mass bombardments made the Hive impossible to assault, and allowed the beleaguered defenders to hold out until the Space Marines arrived upon the world, spearheaded by the Astartes of the Blood Angels chapter. This single battle ensured that all future Imperial Guard regiments raised from Semtexia would continue in the bombardier tradition. Primarily composed of artillery and siege assets, and utilizing a variety of heavier siege vehicles with a combination of a few light armored vehicles, the bombardiers were a formidable opponent against any orc horde. They are uniquely organized into batteries instead of the standard company formations of other Astra Militarum regiments. The bombardiers' static methods of warfare mean that these regiments are extremely vulnerable against a mobile enemy or an army that is capable of launching lightning-fast strikes that can penetrate defensive lines before any actions can be taken. For this reason, the Semtexians will almost always operate in conjunction with other regiments. Relationships between the Semtexians and other Imperial Guard formations are usually very cordial, born of the fact that both realize that once battle is joined, the regiment must rely heavily upon one another for effective support. The Semtexians are also known to help in the construction of massive earthwork formations with their experienced engineering companies. These vital fortifications stretch many Terran miles behind the main war zones, providing a vital network of protection for hundreds of the Semtexian static emplacement artillery vehicles. Back on their homeworld, with regiments to raise, more miners were transported to the planet, providing an exceptional increase in the population. With a larger workforce, new ore strains were quickly found that had led to the complex and powerful artillery design, and also to the production of now legendary Semtexian zinc mines. The planet of Semtexia continued to prosper, and the bombardier's reputation grew. The world of Armageddon was grateful for the bombardier service. The unique Imperial Guard regiment made an enormous impact on the outcome of the Second War of Armageddon. The Semtexian bombardier's unique helmet became synonymous with the valor they showed in combat. Known as the Semtexian Pickelhaube helmet, it is the traditional helmet worn by the regiment. The name came from the ancient Terran Germanic language, Pickel meaning point, and Haube meaning bonnet, a general word for headgear. The protection of this helmet is further augmented by the addition of a mail flap to protect the neck and ears. Their one-of-a-kind uniform was also a hallmark of the regiment. Gray flak armor on top of similarly muted clothing, shielded by large, heavy-looking pieces of steel armor, giving them a very feudal appearance, but in reality Their gear was often weathered and not of the highest standard, due to the fact that their homeworld had not yet fully mastered the art of war gear production before they were mustered. Their shoulder pads came down farther than normal guardsmen and was decorated with a red thin lining and Semtexian heraldry. The Semtexian bombardiers were eventually called back to the hive world that gave them so many battle honors during the Third War of Armageddon. One of the most notable figures to come from the Semtexian bombardiers was Colonel Evarta, a senior ranking officer of the 3rd Semtexian Bombardiers. During the initial landing of the Third War of Armageddon, several of the regiment's transports were destroyed by the orcs as they pressed in on all sides, taking 8 full batteries of Semtexians with them, including 4 mechanized infantry companies. Upon landing on the planet, Colonel Evarta, the highest ranking officer still alive in the regiment, agreed to have the Semtexians immediately broken down into individual squadrons and dispersed throughout other Imperial Guard regiments. Without the possibility of protection from their own mechanized companies, the Semtexians' artillery batteries were extremely vulnerable to orc attacks. Once they were moved to other formations, they were guaranteed at least a measure of protection. 3 more mechanized companies were sent to the Armageddon system, having been delayed by a diversion to counterattack pirate raids on Umbrage 144 before Armageddon itself was attacked. Provided with these necessary reinforcements, Colonel Evarta was able to have his remaining units make their way through the orc blockade relatively intact. His regiment was then fully reformed and was once again capable of providing massed artillery support that sent many orc warbands reeling from the onslaught. Now let's take a look at the Pao Indentured Squadron. The Pao Indentured Squadrons are an Imperial Guard regiment that hails from the once peaceful agri-world of Pao. On their homeworld, the Pao owe their government money as soon as they are born, taking up valuable resources throughout their childhood. They incur a debt that they cannot repay until adolescence. Most citizens of Pao spend the majority of their adult lives working off the debt they incurred during the first part of their lives. There are many ways around this punishing system. The citizens can either borrow money from their local lords, or they can work off the debt to the government by joining the Pao Indentured Squadrons. This system explains why the Pao are never short of recruits. The Pao Indentured Squadrons are equally well known for their marksmanship as they are for their greed. The question of compensation is often raised by the officers of the Indentured Squadrons, and every enemy life they take is tallied somewhere around the soldier's person, to be raised at a later date. Excellent snipers, during the Third Imperial Campaign to defend the hive world of Armageddon from invaders, the Pao were stationed in the upper reaches of Hive Tartarus. The excellent marksmanship skills of the Pao Indentured Squadrons were able to substantially thin out the number of the secondary orc troops laying siege to the outer reaches of the Hive City. This regiment favored a defensive stance where resources were committed only at the last moment. This made them extremely unpopular with fanatically committed regiments such as the Death Corps of Krieg, specifically around the perimeters of the Hive City. Despite their opposing doctrines, these two styles of warfare complemented rather than detracted from each other, despite the resentment that rapidly grew between the two Imperial Guard factions. The Death Corps of Krieg were disgusted by the very idea that a soldier fought to work off a debt, rather than serving out of a sense of pure duty to the Emperor. They found the relaxed attitude toward command hierarchy in the Indentured Squadron to be appalling and inefficient. It is just this fact, though, that makes the Pao so unique. Individuality is a trait that is openly encouraged within the Indentured Squadrons, and the ingenuity and commitment of a soldier is rewarded with a small financial compensation. Noted for their unethical tactics, the Pao familiarized themselves with Hive Tartarus to an exceptional degree, assimilating many of their soldiers into the Hive militia and utilizing the resources of the Hive against the orc invaders. As a result of this, squads of Pao soldiers poisoned the orcs' water supplies with toxic wastes. Snipers harried the orc lines around the clock from the Hive spires surrounding Tartarus, and the tunnels on the outskirts of Tartarus were collapsed, instantly forming an intricate network of trenches, from which the Death Corps of Krieg were reported to have used. This spontaneous and uncoordinated activity was looked upon with contempt by many of the more traditional officers, but the result was undeniably valuable to the war effort. One instance in particular highlights both the potential of the infamous Pao cunning and also the tremendous strain that it can put on Imperial resources. A small squad of low-ranking Jopal officers managed to isolate a tribe of orcs who had somehow obtained several Imperial vehicles. These troop transports were painted with crossed axes and hung with skulls, but unlike the rusting, smoking heaps that the orcs normally employ, these were well maintained and comparatively clean, hinting at a presence of somewhat technologically oriented orc leaders. Masquerading as liaisons from Van Strap's personal guard, the Jopal officers negotiated the unauthorized transfer of 3 Imperial basilisks and a substantial amount of artillery shells with a high-ranking orc mechanic. The Mac, as he called himself, was allegedly frothing at the mouth with excitement, and after thoroughly checking the ballistics, it paid the Jopal cadre substantially for the artillery pieces. However, the basilisks' undercarriages were each strung with a thin line of plastic explosives covered in dust and grime. As soon as the cadre of Jopal officers were safely in the spires of Tartarus, observing the mechs proudly parading their new bolstered artillery battalions to their green-skinned warlord, Mordant, via a satellite camera, the remote devices each officer carried detonated the plastic explosives. This triggered an explosion just destructive enough to detonate the ballistics ammunition, causing a chain reaction that consumed a full 1/6 of the orcs' artillery. Despite the success, Armageddon High Command deemed the voluntary loss of 3 Imperial basilisks as unforgivable, and the officers were summarily stripped of their rank. However, the soldiers in question now number amongst the most popular of their entire company. Now let's take a look at the Mordant Acid Dogs. The Mordant Acid Dogs are the regiments of the Astra Militarum raised from the mining world of Mordant Prime, located in the Segmentum Obscurus. The Mordant Acid Dogs specialize in subterranean tunnel fighting. They are typically deployed to combat zones where the Imperial High Command wishes to take advantage of their natural affinity for dark and confined spaces. The harsh conditions of their world breed extremely tough and resilient warriors, who are perfect for conscription into a military force of the Imperium. Mordant Prime is a world situated to the galactic north of the Eye of Terror, and is known for the mining of bioluminescent bacteria from which a unique, highly corrosive acid is extracted. Mordant is also classed by the Adept Estera as a night world, a planet that sees no sunlight, and its surface is a barren wasteland, totally unfit for human habitation. The only reason humanity exists at all on this world is to mine the strains of luminescent bacteria that grow beneath the surface, so that it can be refined into the potent acid that has many different industrial uses, including the manufacture of Bane Wolf chem cannons. Over the millennia, this process has formed a vast chain of caverns and tunnels that connect across the entire world. Within these tunnels, Mordant mining clans extract the bacteria, culturing it in vast cavern vats to bleed off the most corrosive acids known to the Imperium. These extracts are shipped to forge worlds across the sector, where they find all manners of exocentric fabrication processes. After countless generations of living in mining warrens and working with the potent bioacid, mutations have begun to plague the populace of Mordant Prime. Any such mutants discovered on the planet are promptly dissolved in the same acid that helped create them, either at birth or when their deformity first appears. Few regiments of the Imperial Guard harbor a greater disgust towards abominations of the flesh than the Mordant Acid Dogs. The peoples of Mordant can be split into 2 broad categories, the Acid Miners and everyone else. The miners are organized into an ancient clan structure and have total control over their business. They exploit cheap local labor, paying the workers barely enough to survive in the run-down shanty caverns they call home. Many of the disenfranchised citizens of Mordant turn to a life of organized crime, and gang violence is the only authority acknowledged amongst many of the deeper settlements. Only the skilled miners, who are part of the ancient organization of Mordant mining clans, do not suffer from the extreme poverty experienced by the majority of the populace. The Mordant Acid Dog regiments draw their conscripts from those unfortunate wretches who can no longer tolerate the harsh life of their world and a horrid living condition, or from those who have earned the dire wrath of one of the many criminal gangs. Mordant troopers display a trait common of many of their kin, the carrying of additional equipment into a war zone. Mordant units are notorious scroungers, and they often scrounge off Departamental Militarum supply units, who dread requisitions from the quartermaster after coming in contact with a Mordant unit. Mordant troopers routinely search out and utilize any additional war gear they can carry, and as such are masters in the use of all manner of equipment rarely used by other Imperial Guard infantry troops. Most notably, some Mordant regiments scrounging off war gear carries over or mutates into the taking of trophies from the enemy. This is a trait only practiced amongst the Mordant units, and is likely caused by the excessive combat stress under which the troopers often operate. Also likely is that the trophy taking is the result of some deeper spiritual meaning brought on by extended contact with enemy forces tainted by the dark gods. One of the most notable Mordant Acid Dog regiments was the Lucky 13s. Raised in the 37th millennium, the 13th Mordant, the so-called Lucky 13s, was one of the 43 regiments raised to take part in the Imperial Crusade against the Black Crusade of Jihar the Lacerator. This regiment was raised as part of a larger muster brought about by a particular reading of the Emperor's Tarot. This reading, carried out by a senior sanctioned psyker attached to the staff of the Cadian High Command, it spoke of the coming of one whom the dead fear above all else. So it was the 13th that trained intensively for the day they would be dispatched to fight one of humanity's most deadly foes. Despite not having a clue what they might be facing, the 13th Mordant was well versed in the ways of mutants, and had participated in a number of purges, verging the Sentinel worlds, gaining invaluable combat experience in the process. The 13th was trained and equipped as assault pioneers, proficient in the use of such engineering stores as breaching charges, stumners, flamers, and the like. Since their resounding success, the Acid Dog regiments have often been called upon for scouring Imperial worlds on which signs of mutation have begun to show. Colonel Bane was the commanding officer of the 13th Mordant, having served in the Mordant Planetary Defense Force for many years before being promoted to service as an officer within the Imperial Guard, and was proficient in small unit actions against the private armies maintained by the smugglers and criminal syndicates of his world. Furthermore, while detached from the 13th Mordant, he had served in an assault group that put down a mutant uprising in the Scarus sector, leading the attack on the mutant overlord's hive lair and ending the uprising. Bane was therefore judged the ideal commander to lead an assault against the mutants of the Gloom Worlds, and whose superior briefed him to seek out and engage the enemy leadership as his highest priority. And finally, let's take a look at the Bronxian Longswords. The Brontian Longknives are a highly disciplined regiment of the Imperial Guard, conscripted in large numbers from the hive world of Bront, located within the Golino Reach subsector of the Calixis sector. The hive world of Bront is known to be a particularly violent place, yet possesses a level of order and discipline not found on many of the hive worlds of similar population density. One of the younger hive worlds in the Calixis sector, Bront was founded almost a decade after the end of the Angevin Crusade, as a result of the 33rd Army Group, the last of the Crusade's forces to be demobilized as the sector fully established itself in the Imperium of Man. While not originally a hive world, Bront was swiftly industrialized and was reclassified by the Administratum as a hive world within a mere 1,000 standard years of its founding. Bront's populace was formed from the descendants of the countless thousands of Imperial Guardsmen and their families who were originally drawn from dozens of different worlds, who had been brought together by the shared experience of conflict. Brontian regiments are proud to continue in the martial traditions of their ancestors, fighting for the Imperium as their ancestors did generations ago during the Angevin Crusade. With the Calixis sector still considered relatively young and wild, Brontian regiments are most frequently deployed to relatively local conflicts, from the brutal insurrections of the Meritech Wars to the Mutant Uprising on Trank and the 47 Capella Pacification. However, an increased number of Brontians have seen action in war zones further away, particularly with the needs of the Margin Crusade increasing with every passing year. When Duke Cerberus VIII annexed the worlds beyond the Periphery subsector in the Severan Dominant, Bront increased its recruitment rate, offering a greater tithe of men to the Departamental Militarum and to Lord Sector Marxus Hax, in order to punish his transgression against the labors that their ancestors bled for. Dozens of regiments have been thrown to this conflict every single year, and this seems unlikely to cease as the conflict of the Spinward Front continues to seethe. The population of Bront have strong traditions of military discipline and ancestral ties to the Imperial Guard, with old regimental affiliations forming a system of clan houses. These clans form the heart of the Brontian society, maintaining ancient traditions from their ancestors' distant homeworlds and instilling a deep sense of loyalty and duty to the God Emperor in its people. However, the military traditions that define Brontian culture also ensures that the clans work tirelessly to be ready to defend the Imperium, as their ancestors once did. Disputes between clans are resolved through ritualized mass battles, favoring an assortment of blades over pistols, rifles, and other ranged weapons. These ritual battles typically leave little more than scars, which are worn openly whenever possible to display the warrior's victories and losses. And every Brontian warrior knows and can recount the history of every one of its scars. While most scars are regarded as a sign of experience and honor, a few are viewed with scorn. Scars upon a warrior's back are universally regarded as dishonorable, whether from the bite of a lash to punish a criminal, or from the edge of a blade when fleeing from battle. Cowards are ill-favored in Brontian society, and seldom rise to achieve any worthy status once marked as such. The people of Bront grow up surrounded by crowds in the hive cities, and they are used to weaving through even the densest mobs with ease. Brontians seldom endure the horrors of open sky, or suffer the indignities of the greater outdoors. When recruited into the Imperial Guard, Brontian longknives are deliberately drawn from multiple clans, with individual companies, platoons, or even squads, all holding different ancestral affiliations. This means that each Brontian regiment represents the world and its people as a whole, rather than any one element of it, and the bonds of bloodshed formed during the ritual battles hold these groups together in spite of their differences. The Brontian knows to respect those he faces in battle for the death they can deliver, and the warriors of other clans have been faced many times. Individual Brontian guardsmen are still known to bear their scars openly and carry their favorite knives about their person, adding new blades to their collection with every campaign survived. A Brontian soldier's experience can be seen in the scars on his arm, torso, and face, and in the knives strapped on his armor. Brontian officers are known to carry the tradition a step further, with an array of swords worn on their belt and over their shoulder, and their scars used to help determine their worth as frontline leaders. Rare is the Brontian officer who achieves a significant rank with dishonors marks upon his back. Brontian regiments are most commonly infantry, mechanized infantry, or light infantry, with Brontian armored regiments being extremely rare. The Brontian preference and talent for close assault are ill-suited to armor or artillery regiments, and are better served being placed at the front lines, leading assaults with bayonet charges or ambushing enemy patrols with blackened knives. Some notable exceptions exist, such as the famed Brontian 82nd Armored, whose Lehman Russ Demolisher squadrons were found at the heart of the fighting, pounding enemies and fortifications alike at close range. To understand the ferociousness of the Brontian regiments, we must look at the 4th Brontian Longknives. They are a veteran regiment that had served the Imperium across multitude battlefronts over the past 25 years. During that time, they have proven themselves repeatedly against Xeno and heretic forces. Their preferred heavy weapon is the autocannon, while their favorite assault weapon is the melta-gun. Only their command squads are officially assigned Chimera transports. Platoons are disciplined to maintain daily marches of 30 kilometers or more under conditions of lighter resistance for weeks at a time. Only in situations where troopers need to travel more than a week's march are they assigned transport. Due to the harsh conditions on their positioned world of Scribe and the limits of support from the Imperial Navy, the regiment has been forced to convert civilian vehicles for extended troop transit on several occasions. Once pressed into service, the regiment assumes full responsibility for keeping these vehicles fully functional over an extended period. As a light infantry regiment, the 4th Brontian Longknives are well suited to combat the native orc population. Due to the planet's low mineral content, those orcs are relatively poor armed and have few examples of the race's characteristic vehicles. Sending them to combat such a foe may have been a deliberate choice based upon the High Command's historic knowledge of scrying. Unfortunately, the orcs associated with War Boss Tough Gob are capable of fielding a substantially higher number of vehicles, most of which they brought with them aboard their rocks. This has led to many situations where the regiments have had to depend upon the efficiency of their melta-guns against the orc vehicles. Culturally, the Brontians are extremely disciplined during military situations, but tend to cut loose when on leave or even just off duty. They are generally a garrulous lot, who are friendly towards outsiders, as long as the outsiders give the appearance of being capable warriors. They look down on those who lack the necessary discipline or talent to be effective warriors. This regiment is also a particularly superstitious lot, as they have seen a number of unholy and unnatural events during past battles against heretical foes. A less proven regiment might even have been disbanded or sent on a suicide mission, as the mere knowledge of some of these events could lead to heresy. The current Imperial Guard regiment, designated as the 5th Brontian Longknives, are the 4th to bear the name and traditions, commanded by the daring and charismatic Colonel Eon Dunach. Mustered with the establishment of the Spinward Front, the 5th Longknives have served primarily on Kull as part of a counter-incursion force based in Fort Drusus, pushing back against orc assaults wherever they occur, with little respite between individual battles. As a frontline assault force, the 5th Brontians have suffered extensive casualties during the years of warfare, but their renown and continued success have seen them bolstered by the remnants of other Brontian regiments. To date, 16 other Brontian infantry regiments have been consolidated into the strength of the 5th Longknives, creating a force forged by brutal warfare into a brotherhood of hardened veterans. Famous for leading the forlorn hope against the orc stronghold on Tyra, Colonel Dunach is a man for whom the horrors of war serve as little discouragement. Ambitious, but with the will and talent to support his aspirations to glory and renown, Dunach's rise to command on the 5th Longknives has seen the regiment placed at the forefront of the onslaught against the orcs, taking their knives and swords to the greenskins' flesh. The colonel and his regiment has received several commendations from high command in the Spinward Front for shattering orc bulwarks and crippling greenskin offensives, and they have gained a reputation as some of the most foremost close-quarter specialists amongst the Imperial Guard regiments, staving off the devastating advance of Wa Grimtooth. The soldiers of the Brontian 5th, informally called the Scarsowers, are a proud example of their world's warriors, strong, quick, and deadly with a blade, loyal and unquestioning, and courageous in the face of the enemy. Their honor is without question, and their knives without mercy, for the enemies of the Imperium. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. It's just $1 a month. With that $1, it helps us create the giveaways at the end of each month, which, by the way, there's 2 going on so far as of the recording of this video. If you check out our 40 facts on the organization of the Sisters of Battle, and if you check out our 40 facts on the Hive cult, the Gene Stealer cult, you can get 2 starter sets. The Sisters of Battle starter set is basically a whole army. So good luck to you guys. Jump on over there, and the winner should be announced pretty soon. What I need from you guys is to comment down in the comment section below. Let us know what Imperial Guard regiment you guys want us to talk about next. And just out of curiosity, what did you guys get for Christmas? Comment down in the comment section below. And with that said, I can't wait to talk to you guys in the comment section below. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.